As an amateur writer, do you find your book boring? Does it not sell? Does nobody want to turn the page? What's causing that? Chances are you're not putting the protagonist in the greatest amount of danger you can be. So how do we fix that? What can we do to make your novel so exciting that people are going to want to turn the page until the very end? We're going to be answering those questions and more, and we're starting right now. Chances are your protagonist is really boring. This happens to a lot of amateur writers. They set out to write a novel and they want someone to read it. But the problem is that the protagonist, the character who the story flows through, that character just isn't interesting. They sit back and they don't do anything, while in fact all the co-stars in the novel, they're the ones who are putting themselves into danger. They're the ones who are doing the risky things. That's the one who the reader wants to follow. Problem is that your protagonist is the one who sells your novel. They're the ones who we're supposed to care about. They're the ones who we're supposed to want to read about. But chances are your protagonist just sits back and does nothing. Why? Because as an amateur writer, you're probably putting yourself into your novel. The protagonist is you. And you're not going to put yourself into danger in real life. Of course not. We don't go around investigating haunted houses or following bad guys or entering into places we're not supposed to. Nobody does that. But we want to read about that in a novel. Think about a James Bond novel. Why do people enjoy reading James Bond? Because James Bond is forever putting himself in the greatest amount of danger. His life is at risk at all times. From the first page to the last, James Bond's life is in danger. He is the one who is going to investigate. He's the one who's going to look in places where he shouldn't. Where your average person would run, he walks towards. He wants to look behind the door that says, "Do not enter." And because he does this, we like to live through him. As readers, we want to live through our protagonist. We live regular lives. We go to work, watch TV, but we read books because we want to live in someone else's world. We want to do things that are risky, but we don't want to do them in real life. It's like someone skydiving. We can watch a video or read a book about someone skydiving, but we're not actually wanting to do it ourselves because it's dangerous. This is why people like reading thriller novels, because the protagonist is in the greatest amount of danger. They're the ones who have the worst things happening to them. They're the ones who they're at risk of losing their job, losing their loved ones. Their family is at risk. As a writer, you want to ask yourself, what does my character care about the most? What is the most important thing in their life that they cannot afford to lose? That is the very thing that as a writer you want to threaten. You want to have the thing that the protagonist cares about most being the thing that they're going to lose in this novel if they don't succeed. The character is on a journey, and your character cannot walk away. If your character can walk away, and they don't, the reader's going to wonder why not. Why did this protagonist why not walk away from the danger? You want to make sure that your protagonist has to complete this journey. Something is compelling them. They have to put themselves into danger. And the thing that they care about most is the thing that's at danger. That's the thing that they're going to risk losing. That's going to make the reader want to turn the page. Your protagonist should not be safe at any point. And it's not just thrillers. Look at dramas like Terms of Endearment. There's no guns or bombs in it, but it's about a mother and a daughter and the tough relationship that they have. All the daughter wants is unconditional love from the mother, but the mother can't provide it. And what does the daughter care about most? She cares about family. She cares about love. She wants to be with her mother, but she can't because the mother is just difficult to be around. In this book, the thing that the protagonist cares about most is at danger. The protagonist is at the heart of the problem. They cannot just walk away from this. And as a writer, you always want to make sure that the reader is fearing for the protagonist? The protagonist's happiness, their safety. Is the protagonist going to walk away from this unharmed? Will they be happy in the end? If your protagonist is safe, then you actually have a boring story. This is why villains actually end up being the most interesting characters, because they're the ones who are going to go out there and do something. They're the ones who take action. Chances are your protagonist takes the least amount of action. They're the ones who stand back and let everybody else do the work. Readers don't want to read a book like this. They don't want to read a book where the protagonist just stands around while everybody else puts themselves into harm's way. Can you imagine reading Nancy Drew novels where everybody else does the hard work and Nancy Drew just stands around? This would not sell. Same thing with the Hardy Boys. The Hardy Boys were the ones who would put themselves into danger. Their lives were on the line with every page. This made the reader want to turn the page. Are they going to be safe? Will they succeed? Will they stop the bad guy? If the Hardy Boys just sat around and let everybody else do the work, we wouldn't care about them. We wouldn't fear for them. The more the reader fears for the protagonist, the more likely the reader is to want to turn the page. Dan Brown understands this when he writes books like The Da Vinci Code. He understands that Robert Langdon, the protagonist, his life is in danger on every page. We worry for Robert Langdon. We want to know if he's going to be safe. As a writer, you don't want to create a character like Robert Langdon who just sits back and does nothing while everybody else does the hard work. As a reader, you're not going to want to turn the page. So as a writer, you must always remember that your character has to be put through the ringer. They have to be the ones to get dirty. They're the ones who have to crawl through the mud, climb the highest mountains. They're the ones whose lives are at risk on every page. The more you put the protagonist through the ringer, the more the reader is going to want to turn the page to see just how on earth the protagonist is going to get through this. Will they be safe? Will they be happy? They're going to want to turn the page to find out. A great example of this is in any Stephen King novel. People think that Stephen King writes about monsters, when in fact Stephen King writes about characters, the protagonist. He creates everyday regular people, people who you can relate to, people who feel as though it could be you in that novel. Then he creates a very scary villain. The villain is bigger and stronger than the protagonist. And the villain is directly after the protagonist. The villain is, and when you read a Stephen King novel, you can't help but feel as though you're in that novel. You can't help but feel as though it's you. And so when the villain goes after the protagonist, you can't help but feel as though that villain is after you. When you read a novel like Cujo, you can't help but feel as though that rabid dog is after you. You're not reading about a character who's safe. The protagonist is trapped in a car, and there's a rabid Saint Bernard circling it. Now, Stephen King could have written about someone the protagonist is on the phone, talking to someone who is trapped in a car. But the problem is that we wouldn't care about the protagonist on the phone. We would care about the person trapped in the car. And Stephen King does that. He puts us in the car. We feel as though the rabid Saint Bernard is after us. There's no time in which you read a Stephen King novel in which you feel as though the protagonist is safe. The protagonist is always in the greatest amount of danger. They're the ones who can be physically or mentally harmed by the big bad villain. Stephen King always applies this to every novel and short story that he writes. And because he writes his characters so powerful, so rich, we feel as though we're living through their mind, seeing through their eyes. So we feel as though the protagonist is us. And now the protagonist has to deal with this villain, this big bad villain. But the protagonist is never safe in any Stephen King novel. All you have to do is read any one of his novels, and you will see that of all the characters in the novel, it is the protagonist who has the worst problems of all. They're the ones who had medical problems. financial problems, troubles at work, troubles with their family. And now on top of all of that, they have to deal with the big bad villain who now wants to harm them. And this average person who you relate to, who now you feel as though it's you, now has to stop this big bad villain who is coming directly after them. It's not like the villain is walking away and the protagonist is running in front of that villain. The villain is after the protagonist. So you feel as though the villain is after you. So when you read a Stephen King novel, you're reading to see how you're going to solve, how you're going to get out of this problem. Can you survive the villain? And this is what makes us want to read every Stephen King novel, because you know that it's you that's going to be in the story, and the villain is coming after you. That is why, as a writer, it doesn't matter if you're writing comedy, horror, drama, you want to make sure that your protagonist has it the most difficult. You don't want anything safe for them. You don't want their marriage, their friends, their job, financial, their health. You always want to make things extremely difficult for your protagonist. Because the more difficult you make it for them in every way possible, the more the reader is going to want to read to the end to find out how on earth this protagonist is going to get out of this problem. If you make things safe for your protagonist, you've actually written a boring story. And chances are, if you've ever read a book that you've stopped halfway through, it's because things were not scary enough for your protagonist. You didn't fear for them. It was boring for you because the protagonist in that novel was safe. So as a writer, you want to make sure that your protagonist has it the most difficult, the most to lose. Ask yourself, what does my lead character care about the most? What's so important to them? That is what you threaten throughout the novel. Chances are, if you've submitted a book to a literary agent and they rejected it, it's probably because your lead character was boring. Your lead character wasn't doing much. Your lead character was standing around. The literary agent couldn't get into your book. They couldn't care about your protagonist because they didn't fear for them. And if you really want a literary agent to read your book and to love it, put your protagonist in the greatest amount of danger. Let the protagonist know. Let the literary agent know what it is that your protagonist cares about the most, what they value the most. And that is what you put in danger. That's going to make the literary agent want to turn the page, because they're just as human as everybody else. And when we worry for a protagonist and what they care about and what they can lose, that's going to make us want to turn the page, as it does with anyone else. So as a writer, make sure that if you're submitting a book to a literary agent, that the protagonist make sure that your lead character is in the greatest amount of danger possible. If you enjoyed watching this video, be sure to check out my website. I'll leave a link in the descriptions down below, where you can read a tremendous number of blogs that will give you the greatest advice on how you can become the greatest writer possible. In fact, if you want to watch my next video about should you buy an app to help you with your writing, there are a tremendous number of apps available to help writers. But are they really necessary? Can they hurt you? In fact, I'm going to leave a link for that video right here, and you can click on it right now and start watching.